It's a general translation. It's not very specific, and when it comes to critical points of discussion, it actually is quite misleading. So there's a word of caution to use it if one has to use it. The Urdu translation is quite faithful to the Arabic, and it's been done by scholars who are in the tradition from a very far-flung place in Pakistan, from Bhera. And it's a very intentional translation, meaning Karam Ali Shah, Rahimullah, may Allah have mercy on him, he had these students in the madrasa, he trained them, and then they undertook this translation. We are going to base our classes fundamentally on this, but we will also use other tafsirs. So this introductory class is just to set the stage, and inshallah we should be able to do the A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, and then perhaps a part of the Basmallah as well. Basmallah we did before as well. In the thematic study of the Qur'an, we had the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also the article in the first volume on Basmallah is quite useful in that sense as well. One fascinating aspect of doing this is that we have an understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from another time. Whenever we dig into the tafsir literature, we do so, if we are reading it correctly, with the understanding that every generation, every time, every age, every century has produced specific kinds of tafsirs. Therefore, from that we understand that until the end of time, humankind is going to benefit from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the perspective of their own time. This is a very important point to remember, because 2023, given our own mental, spiritual, intellectual perspective, again, there is a range of perspectives within our own generation, within our own time, individually, as well as where we live, as well as our exposure to the tradition, our linguistic abilities. Many things define how we understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the objectivity of that understanding is something extremely important to understand. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an ayah, or Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen is an ayah. How do we understand this ayah? And this is, of course, the foundation of the tafsir literature, and this is, of course, the fundamental effort that we are making individually. Whenever we read the Quran, our understanding, where does it come from? So my hope is that we are able to see the limitations of our understanding and not be discouraged by the limitations, but be encouraged by the discussions available to us. Meaning, we don't insist that what I understand from a given ayah is the only meaning that there is to that ayah. At the same time, we need to gain a certain degree of confidence that what we are understanding from the ayah is not, there is a meaning to every ayah of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's kalam has meanings which are fixed in many ways. So it's not that anybody can say anything about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we understand from any ayah, any verse, any surah, any text, any part of the text of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to understand it with a degree of certitude, so that this is the strength of knowledge. The beauty of going to the tafsirs is that we gain lots of perspectives. So I'm going to share my screen, inshallah. This is a benefit of being able to do so without other interruptions here. We have, of course, we have hundreds of tafsirs, but this list I have is of about 100 tafsirs. There are other lists that I have of 220 tafsirs, starting with the 1st century. There are two kinds of, fundamentally, there are two kinds of tafsirs. In reality, there is only one tafsir, and that is whatever the Prophet ﷺ has told us about any surah or any ayah of the Quran. That is the real tafsir. Everything else is in the second category, which is to understand it through the human effort, the human being not being the Prophet ﷺ. So our loyalty is not, or should not be, to any individual mufassir or translator, but to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we know for certain that this is what the Prophet ﷺ has said about this surah, about this ayah, then there is a qat'i knowledge. That kind of knowledge is, we cannot compare it to the other kinds. Which means that in our own time, when we have tafsirs, when we read, when we try to deepen our understanding through tafsir, I'm not talking about translations now. We did that during the last few classes, and we saw how difficult it is, how almost impossible it to gain any kind of in-depth or even true knowledge of the Quran in many cases, because translation take us through a different language, they take us to the understanding of the translator, and other problems that we discussed before. The beauty of going to the tafsirs is that now we are not in a stagnant, self-contained, I shouldn't say stagnant, not all translations are stagnant, most of them are, but we are not in a pond anymore. We are in a little stream. Tafsirs take us out from the limited translator realm to at least a stream if we go into the tafsirs. And this history of tafsir is so fascinating, because these streams then branch out to regions. And this is where I want to say something about Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah, as well, because he comes from, as you can figure out from the name, al-Qurtubi, from Cordoba. And Cordoba was part of the Muslim, very special Muslim civilization that emerged on the Iberian Peninsula. And this happened very early, actually. This happened in that first wave of expansion within the 1st century of Hijrah, that Muslims arrived there. And Cordoba, of course, has a very, very interesting history of its own. But the tafsir literature, the stream that we are talking about, can be understood as a unique development within the tafsir literature. This stream, if we could think of the tafsir literature as a river that flows from the origin of the revelation from the Prophet ﷺ himself, Makkah and Medina, reaching out geographically and over time to different regions and connected to the ocean of the Quran itself. So the rivers come out of the oceans of the knowledge of the Quran. They go to different geographical regions, and within those rivers, from those rivers, we have smaller streams. So the Indian subcontinent, perhaps we can think of that as well, like a specific kind of stream of tafsir. The Malay area has its own. So all of these regional streams come with regional flavors. What happened within that region, what kind of scholarship evolved, what were the local conditions. And most of all, if we think of one major river, main river of tafsir, like that's the main river connected with the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, all of this is in Arabic. How are these streams connected to the main river? I hope my imagery is helpful in saying that there is a mainstream tafsir tradition in Arabic, starting, if you look at the screen here, starting with the tafsir of, this is first word is Mujahid, not Majad, Mujahid. Mujahid bin Jabr. He is a follower, he's a Tabai. And then we have Tafsir Muqatil, who died in 150 on the, I inshallah shared this on the Quran class resources. And then down the centuries we have, so we have Imam Shafi's Tafsir and all the way to the present time, 1442. So these are 111 tafsirs. Of course, I don't mean that there were only 111 in these 1400 years. These are the major tafsirs, except for the 14th century, like the present era. We don't really know which one of these tafsirs is going to withstand the test of time. But the beauty of our tradition is that the test of time itself makes a tafsir either disappear or become secondary. So for those who are interested in the tafsir scholarship, what this means is that there is a trajectory of tafsir tradition based on two things. Number one is the time, sequential, century after century. Number two, connected with various regions where they were written. So what came out of the Maghrib in general, and especially the Andalusia, that has a very special flavor. And these regions are also impacted by the legal schools which were adopted in those regions. For example, the dominant legal school is Maliki in Al-Andalusia. They followed the Maliki school, and they're kind of relaxed. They're not so uptight about many things. The weather was or is beautiful. It is a lush place, and abundance of fruits, coming from the deserts, the Arabs who arrived there, Abdurrahman, the first Umayyad, who actually escaped. And the story goes that he actually swam across the river. People were in pursuit of his life, and he escaped, and he arrived in what is now Morocco, which had already been conquered by Tariq bin Ziyad, and then he arrived in Cordoba. And when he arrived in Cordoba, this is early 8th century, 711, I think is the date. So he established the Umayyad branch of Caliphate, and by then the Abbasids had taken over the main branch, and this started the long history of Islam in Al-Andalusia. So Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Ansari al-Khazraji, whose tafsir is going to be the foundational text for our second round of the Qur'an classes. He died in 671, and he has a very interesting personal history, and what we know about him is also very, very interesting, because you see, these are extremely significant times for the Muslim Ummah, for the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. He witnessed the loss of Cordoba to the Christians in his own life, and what we know of him is connected with the history of Muslims in general and history of Al-Andalusia in particular. If you look at the century in which he is born and the century in which he lived, like I just said that he died in 671. And this one I think says 671. I hope you can see the screen here. This is the Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Ahmad bin Abi Bakr bin Farh al-Ansari al-Khazraji, and he's called Shamsuddin. He's the son of religion. Like Imam al-Ghazali is called Hujjatul Islam. He's called Shamsuddin al-Qurtubi. 671, so the 7th century Hijrah. 7th century Hijrah is the century in which we have major tafsirs in our tradition. So Imam al-Razi, Fakhruddin Razi, Fatih al-Ghaib, he died in 606. And then we have also Tafsir al-Baydawi in the same century, which is in Anwar al-Tanzil, wa Isra al-Ta'wil, 685. Now look at the geographical region. Imam al-Razi, Fakhruddin Razi is in Ray, which is just outside Tehran now. Imam Baydawi, of course, again, is from Baida, which is in Iran as well. And then we have the Maghribi region. It's also important to know that this region of Al-Andalus produced other major mufassirs before Imam al-Qurtubi, which is very important to understand, because that means he is the culmination of him and the maturity of the tafsir tradition in Al-Andalusia. And then what happened in his own life is It's very traumatic, but at the same time, it gave us an insight into the Tafsir tradition as well, because his town was attacked, his home was attacked by the Christian army, and his father was martyred. His father was martyred, and this happened in 630. So he was about 20 years old. Because of the difficulty in the date of birth, there are different dates, but 600 is the date. We are told, some say 610 as well. But if it was 610, then he will be 20-year-old almost, or if it's 600, then it will be 27. So they attacked their home, and his father was martyred. And by then, he had already studied Arabic and Tafsir and Hadith with 4 major scholars in the city of Cordoba. And he went to one of them and he said, "What do I do? My father has been martyred. In terms of the janazah, is he a shaheed?" And this gives us, even at that young age, his understanding of the legalities of the burial. Because, as you know, we have different obligatory procedures for the burial of the shaheeds. We don't give them ghusl, for example, and they are buried in their blood. And the fascinating aspect is that Imam al-Qurtubi, would refer to this incident that happened when he was writing his tafsir. In the ayah in Surah Al-Imran, that tells us that the shaheeds, those who are killed in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are not dead. They are living with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, he tells us in the tafsir what happened to his father and the legal dilemma he faced, whether to give him a ghusl or not. Inshallah, when we get to that point, or even next time, I will mention the details of what he actually did. But because his tafsir is called al-Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an, the title tells us that he is interested in the legalities, like the legal ahkam in the Quran. What is normally called the fiqh, like the rulings, the legal rulings. So he called his tafsir al-Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an, which is, if we don't go to the full title of the work, and if we don't read the introduction that he himself wrote for his book, it may give people the wrong idea that this is just a book about the legal ahkam of the Quran, which is not the case, because Imam al-Qurtubi is a scholar of hadith, he's a scholar of qiraat, he's a scholar of he's a legal scholar as well, and he is deeply embedded in the linguistic tradition as well. So his tafsir is not merely and only dealing with the ahkam of the Quran intentionally. It's not like that it just happened, but he is a very organized mind, like all of the Magharibi scholars. We find this is a very, very specific characteristic of those minds, that they are very organized. Mawardi, Ibn Atiyah, they are They are giants in their thinking. So this is something that really bothered me in the English translation, in the introduction to the English translation. The sister who did, she's a convert. And in the introduction to her English translation, she says that although this tafsir is supposed to be, ahkam al-Qur'an is supposed to be a legal ruling, tafsir of legal rulings, but the author digresses a lot, she says. And so I have taken out those passages, she says, in my translation, which were not relevant. This is, it just hit me. Look at they say it, jura, like in Urdu, we also say jurat. Look at the audacity of the translator. She is saying that this Imam of our tradition didn't know what he is doing. He just digresses and just goes here and there, and I've taken those parts out, she says. One should have some degree of respect and some degree of understanding of one's own place. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always keep our humility. And that is one of the characteristics of Imam al-Qurtubi, that every biographer, everyone who has written a note on him, they mention that he was extremely, his humility, and he is a zahid, he is an ascetic, and his book is like his Tazkiratul Maut. That's a wonderful book that he wrote. It's just the remembrance of death. And when he escaped from Cordoba, this masjid that was built there, this is such a painful part of this whole narrative. The masjid, those who have seen this masjid, al-Qurtuba, it's a gem. It's just a remarkable architectural structure. And it's been converted into a church when they took Cordoba. One of the first things they did was to put in a dark cross and all the rest of it in this beautiful place. And recently, this narrative that, well, this masjid was originally a church, and then Muslims came and they took over the church and they converted into a masjid, that has been deconstructed. And there is enough historical evidence that this masjid was not built upon a church. This was raw land. This is an intentional structure. And it was built very quickly, but it took many generations to give it the beauty that it has. Its arches and its beautiful structure, this is a very unique, and we cannot pray there anymore. I tried, my son Basit tried, and the guards, one guard, they have guards there, they came to us, and you cannot do this, and etc. So when the masjid was taken over, then he left Cordoba, he arrived in Iskandria, and then he studied with the mainstream scholars in Egypt. So that's what I was getting at. The stream of scholarship in Al-Andalusia, he benefited from 4 major scholars there, and then he arrives in Egypt. He's already a scholar, but still, he's relatively young. And then he benefited from the mainstream tafsir tradition before he wrote this tafsir. So we have a combination of regional tafsir tradition, the mainstream tafsir tradition. And then we have this personal very high level zuhud. He's a Zahid. I don't want to use asceticism. I dislike isms because isms are all ideologies. That's not a good term for anything. Monotheism, anything that ends with ism is problematic in the conceptual meaning of the term. But he remained perpetually in a state of faqr. So you feel that in his tafsir everywhere. So this is a monumental work, really. This is something that has withstood the test of time. And it's beautiful because it's almost halfway from us, from that beginning of the tafsir tradition to the 15th century. And this is towards the end of the 7th century. So we have the benefit of a scholar who is deeply embedded in the tradition, but who is distant enough to not to critically examine what he is receiving. And that is one very specific aspect of this tafsir, because the Israeliyat, which had entered right at the beginning, Muqatil bin Sulaiman, his tafsir, he died in 150, and his tafsir has lots of Israeliyats, because this is the beginning of the tafsir tradition, and they just embedded these narratives in the tafsir literature. By the time 656, I think that when this tafsir was written, there was enough distance from the received knowledge to critically examine and say, oh, wait a minute, I don't need to repeat this. Like even Imam al-Tabari, who is our great giant of tafsir, he quotes the Israeliyat because he said, I want to collect, before I die, I want to collect everything that has been said about this ayah over the last 300 years. So we have an encyclopedia of tafsir in his tafsir, and then we come to this filter and titration, and it goes through successive analysis, and this, where does this account come from? And then there are significant individual editions like Mafatil al-Ghaib of Imam al-Razi, for instance, which is a unique tafsir in itself, because it has layer after layer of what he calls masala, which is a very hard term to translate. Masala, literally it means question, but these are queries. These are investigations into this effort. And if we look at this tafsir of Imam al-Qurtubi, he follows the same methodology as Razi had followed before him. Razi died in 606, and al-Qurtubi died in 671. So they are in the same century, about 65 years apart in their death. I haven't been able to confirm whether tafsir of Imam al-Razi had reached Imam al-Qurtubi or not. Inshallah, I'll look into that. But the methodology is very interesting. So when we go, and the organization is just amazing. So I hope we can just dip into the first part that I have said enough. I didn't want to go into the history of tafsirs, but the first part, very first thing we want to begin, inshallah, with what is said about A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim. So when we go to A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, what do we see? We see the methodology that was used by Razi, for instance. And that is the very first sentence on A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem is that there are 12 masala, like there are 12 queries about A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. This is how organized this mind is. So, and everything follows. All the ayahs follow the same pattern. Like in Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa fiha sab'a wa ishrun mas'ala. That organization gives us a very clear-cut picture of the aspects of every single ayah in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's begin, inshallah. Al-Qawl fil ista'adha wa fiha athnat ashra masala. It says that the A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem has 12 queries about it. And the beauty of it is that always the first layer is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said about it. So he says, the first is, Amar Allah ta'ala bil ista'adha inda awwala kulli qira'at faqala ta'ala fa idha qara'ta al-Qur'ana fasta'iz billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Surah Al-Nahl, ayah 98. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ, when you recite the Quran, فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ, seek refuge from Shaitan ar-Rajim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us, he says, Amar Allah ta'ala bil ista'adha. This so how would we have 12 queries about this one ayah, which is not an ayah of the Quran? A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem is not an ayah of the Quran. Just remember that I wanted to mention that the introduction khutbah of the work itself, which in this edition is from page 23 to page 82. So almost 60 pages of introduction to the Tafsir that Imam al-Qurtubi himself wrote. This is such a wonderful summary. This is an amazing text in itself, and I hope people will benefit from it, because this is really something that gives us deep insights into a scholar's overall understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He goes into such details as when we recite the Quran, he says we should look at the text of the Quran, because that is the joy of the eye. He says that is the food of the eye, just to look at the text. And he says that when Sayyidina Ali saw someone actually writing the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he told him to beautify the script so that it becomes a joy to look at. And mashallah, if you look at the collection of manuscripts we have of the Quran, and how this tradition has really flourished of calligraphy in Mashhad, they have a special, they have a museum, a special floor dedicated to the manuscripts of the Quran, and I think it's available online as well. And there are such gems of these manuscripts that somebody says that he's writing in 6th or 7th century, 8th century. I don't remember the date, but every single line is going to end with this letter, alif or ain. Can you imagine that? Every single line is going to end with this. Every single page is going to end with this. These are minds. And it just such a joy to really stand in front of these real manuscripts and look at it. So he says that the 12 queries about A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. I hope we really deepen our understanding of this by going deep into this. The first thing he says is that فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us that when we recite the Quran, we should seek refuge from shaitan. The first thing he says that the first of the 12 queries is that the tense used here is actually the past tense, which is very, very important to see that. فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. مَا يَكُونَ مَا كَانَ, instead of using is the past tense. So what is the hikmah? What is the wisdom in using the past tense? And here we see the first instance of the scholarship that we have. وَإِنِّي لَآتِيكُمْ لِذِكْرِي الَّذِي مَدَى says that you can use the past tense for future tense, as the poet says. So he quotes a couplet in which the past tense is used for the future tense. And he also says that scholars have said that this particular sequence has fil kalami taqdeem wa ta'khir. In this kalam, in this ayah, there is taqdeem wa ta'khir. And this is one thing I wanted to mention, that this tafsir actually cannot be read as a self-help, because I think that's what the sister missed. Like in the very first line here, we have this saying that number one, you see the difficulty we have come across when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. The verb used is in the past tense. And what is the intention here of this ayah? That when we are going to recite the Quran, we begin the recitation by seeking refuge from the shaitan, who is a rajim. So this ayah of Surah Al-Nahl, 98 ayah, is in the past tense. And why is it in the past tense? Number one, because you can use the past tense in the meaning of the future tense as the poet uses it, for example. This is one. Number two, أراد ما يكون في غد. So that's one. Number two, wakila fil kalami taqdeem wa ta'khir. It has been said that in this saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there is taqdeem wa ta'khir. And that's what I wanted to mention. That's why I said that one cannot read this tafsir as a self-help unless one is grounded and knows what is in the tradition. So taqdeem wa ta'khir is one of those 80 Imam al-Suyuti has a list of 80 specific aspects of the usage of the language in the Quran, which contribute to its ijaz, which contribute to its imitability. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you remember at one time he said that this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in Arabic language, but it shatters the structure of the Arabic language as it was known. It is not contained, it is not defined by the rules of the Arabic that the Arabs knew. This Arabic is so, this is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the book in a human language, but the weight of that book, لَوْ أَنزَلْنَا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى جَبَلٍ لَرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِيًا مُتَصَدِّيًا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. If this Quran had been sent upon a mountain, you would have seen that it would shatter with the khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the language, the structure of the language shattered. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just, this is the Arabic that is a human language in a sense, but when the Quran came, it just came with its own Arabic. So taqdeem wa ta'khir is one of those 80 list. There may be more, but Imam al-Suyuti in his al-Itiqan has this list of 80 specific features of the Arabic of the Quran, and taqdeem wa ta'khir is one of them. Now, taqdeem wa ta'khir is to bring forward what should come after, sequentially, in time. So in this particular ayah, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. What is being said is that you recite أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ before we begin the recitation, but the past tense means that when you have finished reciting the Quran, then you recite أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Now, the interesting thing is that one of these 12 queries, one of these 12 opinions, actually states that after you finish the Quran recitation, you say أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. And then they say, well, this opinion actually goes against the other opinion which says begin the recitation of the Quran. And then the scholars say, no, wait a minute. What you're doing is you're sealing your recitation from the shaitan from the beginning to the end. You begin by seeking refuge in shaitan, you end by seeking refuge in shaitan. Therefore, you have sealed what was in between. And Allah knows best. So I hope this is clear that this is and look at the examples. These are minds, these are giants. He says that look, fil kalami taqdeem wa ta'khir, in this ayah there is taqdeem wa ta'khir. Taqdeem wa ta'khir. Ta'khir is the delay and taqdeem is qadama, to bring forward. And he says, but when there is such proximity in the fail, then you can do this. He says, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Najm says, ثُمَّ دَنَا فَتَدَلَّى. Al-Mani فَتَدَلَّى ثُمَّ دَنَا. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Iqtarabat is-sa'atu wan shaqqal qamar. Iqtarabat is-sa'atu wan shaqqal qamar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the sa' came near, Iqtarabat is-sa'atu wan shaqqal qamar, and the moon was split. Whereas the splitting of the moon is a sign of the coming of the sa'. And he says there are lots of other examples in the Quran of this. So, ثُمَّ دَنَا فَتَدَلَّى, yani again, there is taqdeem wa ta'khir. So this is the first of the 12 queries about A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. I hope it's clear. We are going to go slow, but inshallah, deepen our knowledge. When we recite the Quran, we begin the recitation with A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, and according to the 12th opinion, we also finish, and thereby we protect it. Now, the next, number 2 query, A'udhu Billahi Minash, A'udhu Billah, is Hazal Amr. This is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ is a command when you start reciting Quran. The question then is this command general or specific? And there is a difference of opinion about the legality of this command, because now we have a similar situation as of the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which inshallah we will cover when we get to that. The question arose whether this command means that we are reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the salah or outside the salah, just like the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, inside the salah or outside the salah. Like when we do our salah, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. But when we are reciting the Quran, there is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the head of every surah except for Surah Tawbah. Is the recitation of that Bismillah obligatory, legally speaking? Same question here. A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir. Is this obligatory? Would we incur any kind of legal penalty if we didn't do this? Would our recitation be invalid? Like we know, for instance, the state of tahara is an obligatory condition of salah. We cannot, our salah is not valid if we are not in the condition of obligatory purity. Like we have done our wudu and we are pure, we are standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is a shart, that is a condition for the acceptance, for the validity, not the acceptance, validity of the salah. The question here is A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem shart, or is this recommended? And Imam al-Qurtubi says, and this is the beauty of this tafsir, because now we have the ahkam coming to us along with the tafsir. And he says that there is a khilaf in it, but the majority position is that this is not a shart for the recitation's acceptability or validity. The third masala is that he says there is consensus ijma' al-ulama ala an at-ta'awudhu laysa min al-Qur'an wala aya minhu wa huwa qawl al-qari. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Please be very careful about this because this is a serious issue. What is being said is the following. The ijma', consensus of the scholars, is that ta'udh is not an ayah of the Quran. Rather, this is the statement of the one who is reciting the Quran or who is going to recite the Quran. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the shaitan ar-rajim. And I'm saying that we need to be careful because the ayah says, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. What is being said is that the exact wording of أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ is not in the Quran. Therefore, it is not an ayah of the Quran because the ayah says, فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. It doesn't say أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Although the difference is only in the first word, first ta'idh and a'udhu. So that's what's being said, that this is not so if this is the saying of the qari, the saying of the reciter, is this the only saying where does it come from? This is again very beautiful. Where does it come from? So we have a narration from Sayyidina Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, who said that Jibreel, the Prophet ﷺ told me that Jibreel alayhi salam has taught me, this is in the Lawh Mahfuz, Ya Ibn Abd, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim, Hakadha ikrani Jibreel anil Lawh al-Mahfuz anil qalm. This is what Jibreel alayhi salam has taught me from the guarded tablet anil qalm, with the pen. Then we have other narrations in which we have A'udhu billahi samil alim minash shaitanir rajim. So there are additional words. A'udhu billahi A'udhu billahi his samil alim minash shaitanir rajim. So we have two attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the billahi samil alim, the all hearing, the all knower, which means when we begin the recitation, this is not A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim is not the only statement of the reciter. It could be A'udhu billahi samiyul alim minash shaitanir rajim. And then we have even more A'udhu billahi al-azim minash shaitanir rajim, inna allaha huwa samiyul alim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. And then we start reciting the Quran. This is from Ibn Atiyah. So we have fourth query, which gives us the additional words. Now there is another beauty in this, in the fifth masala, and that is, some scholars have said that the recitation should begin with A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, but it should not be loud. It can just be silent without the actual voice coming out when you are reciting, because remember the preferred mode of recitation is out loud, because the Quran is recited out loud, not read as we read silently. It should be read out loud. And again, the khilaf was whether or not this is obligatory or not, and some scholars say yes, it is obligatory. And number 6 is that this ayah is about the, as I already mentioned, about the salah, that this is obligatory in the salah, but when we are reciting the Quran outside the salah, it's not obligatory. Number 7, from Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, it's known that he always recited the Quran, started reciting the Quran with the ta'awudh. And then we have this narration from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu as well, that the Prophet ﷺ would recite A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim before the recitation. Within the 7th query, Imam al-Qurtubi says, so what is the benefit of reciting A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim? And he says, look at the answer. He says, number 1, because the first benefit is that you are just following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the benefit of following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just in the following of the command itself. Meaning you are fulfilling the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that in itself is a benefit. But he says, ulama, scholars have also given other additional reasons, and that is the waswasa of shaitan, meaning when we are reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should recite with seeking refuge from the shaitan, so that we are protected from him entering our heart. We are shutting him off. It's protecting our hearts from shaitan in the state of recitation. And the dalil, the proof of that is in the ayah 52nd ayah of Al-Hajj, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ مِنْ رَسُولٍ وَلَا نَبِيٍّ إِلَّا إِذَا تَمَنَّى أَلْقَى الشَّيْطَانُ فِي أُمْنِيَتِهِ. And we have not sent any messenger or any prophet before you, but shaitan would try to interject his own tamanna, his own desires. Therefore, ista'adha is protection from that. I just want to finish these, so please, just a few minutes. So number 8 is the fadila, fi fadl ta'awudh. Ruwiya Musliman Suleiman bin Surad Qala. So he brings in a hadith that is in the Sahih Muslim. And this is very, very important. It's beneficial for us. 2 people came to the Prophet ﷺ and they brought some kind of a case to him. And there was a very heated discussion. And one of them got so angry that his face became red and his veins became prominent, they were full. And the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he said, look, I know a sentence which if this person recites, his state will calm down. And that sentence is A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim. if this person recites this, then his anger will go away. So this A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitan Rajim is the antidote. It's the vaccine for anger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit. Most of all, allow me to benefit from this. This is in Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari. And there are other narrations as well about the benefits of the ista'adha. The ninth is the ista'adha in the kalam of the Arabs, in the how the Arabs used it. They said istajara al-takhayyuz al-shay ala ma'ani al-imtana bihi min al-makruh. Something disliked, something that you fear to be harmful, they would use A'udhu Billahi Minka. So I seek refuge from you in Allah. So A'udh is that. Then 10th is Shaitan, Shaitan Rajim. So from A'udh, we are now just the last two parts of the ista'adha. Shaitan. What is shaitan linguistically? This is beautiful because it gives us linguistic understanding of the word shaitan. What is our concept of shaitan? Everything begins with the ism. Everything begins with the name itself. So shaitan, and the plural is shayateen. The dominant opinion is that this is from shatan, sheen, ta, noon, which means something that is far from khair, from good. So, and he quotes poetry. Al-Beru Shatun is the well that is very deep. Shatan is also a rope, is also called shatan because it's got two ends which are far from each other. And a Bedouin came and his horse was acting up, and it was not under his control. And he said that Kannahu Shaitanu fi Ashtan. It's like he's Shaitan from Ashtan. There is the other opinion is a weaker opinion that Shaitan is actually from Shata, not from Shatn, and the noon is added to it. And so this is the second opinion, that Shaitan, the word Shaitan is from Shata, yani Sheen, Alif, Ta. And the meaning of Shata is to be destroyed. And the noon is Zaid, noon is added to it. And Shata also means to burn. Shayyatul Laham, when you cook meat on the fire, when you barbecue, when you that's called Shayyatul Laham. And when Ista'atul Rajul is when somebody is almost mad with anger. And Naka, everything always goes back to the camels. Naka, Nakatu, Mashiat is the fatness of the camel that hinders its ability to move faster. So Istat is also to be destroyed. And he quotes a couplet for that. But again, the dominant opinion is that it is from Shatan. And the second last of the 12 is a regime. The masala in ista'adha, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. What is a regime? Rajm, you know what rajm is, right? It's the throwing of the stones when we go for Hajj. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to do that this year. We throw stones on the shaitan, al-rajm. But a regime is far away from khair. Far away from khair. A regime is also to kill, and it's also to discard, and it's also to say something bad. And you remember the people of Nuh alayhi salam, what they said, La illam tantahi ya Nuh la takunanna min al-marjumin. And the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam also said that if you didn't stop, La illam tantahi la arjumannak, I will stone you. And finally we have this this narration that Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu said that I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam near Safa, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actually doing the la'ana upon someone. And this is a very difficult narration in terms of understanding it, because Sayyidina Ali says that he saw the Prophet ﷺ, and he was actually addressing the shaitan, the shaitani rajim, and he was saying that I will kill you, O the enemy of Allah, I will kill you to give the raha, to give sukoon, to give for my ummah, like to give my ummah, protect my ummah from you, I will kill you. This is the narration about the Prophet ﷺ is by Safa, he says, Sayyidina Ali in this narration. Are there any questions about anything that we have said? So my suggestion for this week, two things. Number one, if you have you can find this. I can also put it on the class website. The Urdu translation or the English translation. Again, the English translation needs to be read with care. The introduction, the khutbah of the Tafsir, these 60 pages are beautiful pages, if you could read that. And then in preparation for the next class, there are 28 queries about Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We have a very long article on the internet on Qur'an, online.iQuran on Bismillah. So if you could read that, inshallah, that will be beneficial. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار يا الله أنت حليم كريم عظيم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم يا ربي إني أستغفرك لكل ذنب ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار يا الله أنت حليم كريم عظيم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.